All right, so thanks, Matt, for joining us this week. Could you give everyone a little bit of a reminder as to who you are, what you do for Panasonic Lumix USA?
Yeah. What we should do is we should just record this and then we can just play it over and over again for every time I'm on. Yeah. So I am in business development for Panasonic. Basically, I'm out there trying to find new opportunities for Panasonic Lumix cameras to be used for different applications.
Nice, nice. And this conversation, I think, falls like kind of perfect in your expertise and what you've been doing over the last, well, for a long time you've been doing it, but really over the last year, once we released the box camera, the BGH1. Um, so everyone knows, like, from a cinematic perspective and from a live streaming perspective, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about with these box cameras for the last year. But I think what a major group of our normal viewers kind of may not necessarily always be looking into are some of the what I would consider like fringe use cases for anyone that's watching us, areas where you may not normally be thinking about, buying certain camera technology. And that really kind of goes right into pan tilt zoom style cameras. And just the different kind of applications where you would use a camera like this. So to start with, could you give everyone a little bit of a kind of rundown of what PTZ cameras typically are and the kind of environments that you would normally find them in?
Yeah. So why don't we start with that, and then I'll sort of explain. We'll kind of go back in time a little bit to the development of the BGH1
Yeah.
and sort of some of the business use cases that we thought we had seen for the product. So pan tilt zoom cameras are usually about this wide, about this tall. You can't really see about that tall, depending on the size of the sensor in it. And they're kind of these funny little robotic cameras that you can pan left to right, you can tip up and down, and then they usually incorporate anywhere from a 10 times to 20 times zoom lens, almost exclusively with an iris that stops down as you zoom in. It gets darker and darker as you use the zoom function. The goal was to provide an operator-less solution, meaning you don't have to have a camera operator at each location to handle pan, tilt, and zoom functionality. You can have one operator at a remote control station that can then move the cameras from a single control station. So instead of having 5 operators, you have one operator. And these systems have become fairly sophisticated now with the ability to even program in like set camera pans and camera locations. So you can hit, a button for the close up, a button for a wide shot, and you can do that with like 4, 6, 8, however many cameras you're going to have on the network. So we always felt that the box camera would work well as a PT solution, a pan tilt solution, because when we were developing the product and we, did market surveys, we had a lot of people looking at these saying that these would be great coverage cameras. The ability to, position this by a drummer on set, or the ability to put a few of these throughout the stage to pick up, to kind of use it for pickups in different, pickup locations. And we sat there and go, well, why wouldn't we just incorporate this into a pan tilt head and give people that sort of functionality? After all, we had already handled the zoom function that's equal to a lot of the zoom lenses that are in these pan tilt zoom products, with like our power zoom 14 to 42 lens and our power zoom 45 to 175. And even Olympus makes some power zoom solutions as well. So that was always sort of in the forefront, was to kind of work on a high-end PTZ solution for these.
Yeah, yeah, and I think talking about like the placement cameras and stuff like that. I mean, even when we launched the BGH1, we did the whole concert coverage with Cold War Kids, where we had the cameras rigged up. They had them up on. I think they had one flying up on a jib. They had one by the drummer, just like you said, and it was really cool to see having that many cameras rigged out. But you still had, they were static shots. You weren't really moving them save for the jib angle. So, when
Yeah, I think
when
I think in
yeah,
that I think in that scenario you are right, because we had one on a jib, so you have a camera operator on jib, and then you had 2 cameras that were on tripod operating as operator run cameras. But then you had a camera on the stage for the drummer. You had a camera on the stage that was like a set shot for, I think it was like with a bassist, one of the guitarists.
Yeah.
And so those set shot cameras were really kind of stuck with where they were. Um, and so I think that kind of taught us a little bit about how production might use the product. But I think where we really learned the need for PTZ, aside from the fact that our broadcast group sells a lot of pan tilt zoom cameras, and we're able to kind of see where their business has moved. With the pandemic, there was a massive need for these kind of solutions for live event and houses of worship who could no longer do in-person live event. They were having to do these productions remotely and then broadcast their services or their productions just in order to be able to survive as a business. And so the market had really begun to use these pan tilt zoom cameras in a lot more frequency, and they've begun to sort of detect some of the challenges of the pan tilt zoom, which they were designed for convenience. And
Yeah.
Panasonic launched what was at the time considered the most advanced pan tilt zoom camera in the world with the UE150, and that has a 1-inch sensor. And for us, 1-inch sensor is sort of the starting point for good image quality, whereas in PTZ, it's kind of the end point for great image quality. And you're talking about lenses that are maybe f2.8 to f5.6 or f3.5 to f6.3 or f5.6 in order to give you that compact form factor. And so we felt like the box camera solution with the flexibility of the micro four thirds mount and now the full frame mount, we thought people could really get creative and produce some really dynamic looking images. But the problem was you can't really control zoom on those lenses. Like right now I'm on a 25 to 50 f1.7 right now on a GH5 Mark II for this. And I wouldn't be able to remotely control zoom on that product. So I could really only do the pan tilt portion of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it has been, kind of really, really exciting over the last, I don't know, honestly, over the last month. I mean, you and I have been out traveling back at a couple smaller trade shows, one really big trade show. And, we actually had the opportunity to show, kind of end users what it is, we're kind of on about with this. And something really struck me from the smaller shows that we've worked in talking with people that work with PTZ style cameras almost on a daily basis. And that's really like, to your point before, they're 1-inch censored cameras. Our side of the industry, not that we're really a side of the industry, but our typical use cases, we're used to shooting up at ultra high ISOs in certain situations. We're used to, really controlling shallow depth of field, using crazy long lenses. But that's like such a foreign look for a lot of the people that you and I have interacted with. And the first, I think it was the show in Dallas, you and I were talking to a couple people about how, how much better the high ISO was, and showing them hooked up to that OLED display that we had there, showing them, I think, what was it, 10,000 ISO on the BGH1 hooked up. Even that, for a lot of the people that tune in here, 10,000 ISO on a micro four thirds camera has typically been, maybe not the greatest of high ISOs when you're comparing to the much larger sensors. But when you start going into 1-inch sensors at 10,000 ISO versus a micro four thirds camera with a 4/3 sensor shooting at 10,000 ISO, I mean, some of those people were blown away by how clean and sharp this image looked.
I think keep in mind too that you keep referencing a 1-inch camera, 1-inch sensor. That's the apex of pan
Yes.
tilt. That's the peak. So a lot of these people are used to 1/4-inch or 1/2-inch sensors. So you're talking about a camera that's anywhere from a sensor that's 8 to 16 times larger than what they're used to seeing on a regular basis. And so you're taking a product that was developed for convenience and cost efficiency, and the fact they don't have to have a camera operator per camera, and you're now asking for better image quality out of the device, and the market just hasn't reacted to that yet. And so we saw this as an opportunity to integrate the box camera and make it a viable pan tilt and zoom option, even with our best lenses that don't have power zoom functionality. And so, I spent the better part of a year um, trying to locate a partner who could make a pan tilt head for us, or was already in the pan tilt game, who had a product out there that had an interest in joining forces with Panasonic. And so, sort of on a very late in the game, I stumbled upon, it's a company I'd seen for a while, but I'd never really communicated with them directly. And that was a company called DataVideo. Um, and DataVideo is a Taiwanese company, but they have an office in Southern California, and they have a workforce here, and they already make pan tilt zoom cameras. So they kind of look at Panasonic as a competitor, right? Because they make cameras that compete against Panasonic professional products. But in this one space, they have a pan tilt head, which Panasonic doesn't have anything that they offer. And they have customers who are looking for higher image quality solutions beyond these 1-inch sensor and half-inch sensor solutions. So they saw a need, we had a need, and so it made sense for us to kind of join forces and work together. And so it's been a multi-phase process with just initially determining if there was interest from both sides. But
Yeah.
then after we determined the interest, the next step is really, what can we integrate for control? And so, we worked with using the remote port that's on the side of the camera, which gives us control over things like the iris of the lens. It can control zoom on our power zoom lenses, the ability to maybe control gain inside the camera body. The basic remote control functionality, getting that integrated into their pan tilt head. But I always had sort of a bigger vision of this, which is that they would develop a zoom controller. And so we went back and forth on this because, again, in that world, they look at our power zoom lens and they say, well, this is fine. Why do we need anything more? This is f3.5 to 5.6. The sensor looks gorgeous. Why do we need more? And we're like, well, a lot of people want a shallower depth of field, more cinematic look, or some of their biggest struggles with their pan tilt heads or pan tilt zoom cameras is that they just don't work really well in low light. And so, you all provide like a 20x zoom or a 15x zoom lens because you're trying to give them flexibility. Like, you don't know if this thing's going to be mounted in the front of house or if it's going to be mounted in the back of house. We're at a level now where someone's going to know I'm mounting this up the front of house. So I want to go ahead and partner this with a 12 to 35 f2.8 constant from Panasonic. And then the back of house, I want to use the 200 mil f2.8 constant from Panasonic with a 1.4 teleconverter as my punch-in close-up lens, or the 50 to 200 as back of house. And so what they'll now do is they'll mix and match a great lens for up front for a wider angle, and then a longer zoom for back of house, and sort of customize, but still have the ability to do some zoom if you had a way to control it. And so,
Yeah.
and so there was a lot of back and forth on this and how we can make this happen, because there's a certain amount of data that has to be fed back with a motor, right? Because if you're not telling the pan tilt zoom and control software that you've reached the end of the zoom range and you keep zooming, it's just going to sit there and try to push that lens further and further out, and eventually you're going to strip gears out. And so it was a lot of back and forth on how do we make this work. And I have a relationship with Tilta, and Tilta makes the Nucleus M, which is it's a motor system designed for cinema, for like follow focus control. But really, you can control iris on their system. They have iris setting, they have a zoom, and they have focus control. So we connected those two companies together, and their engineering teams worked on a solution to where now you can take a Nucleus M, just off the shelf motor that is available on the market, and connect it with a crossover cable and power into the pan tilt solution from DataVideo. It's the PTR 10 Mark II is the pan tilt. And then you can integrate the controllers from DataVideo. And on the low end, for about $1,000, they have a controller that'll control 4 cameras, and each camera I think has either 4 or 8 camera positions independently that are programmable. And so once you start to really factor the total cost, of like a 50 to 200 lens from Panasonic for about $1,800, a box camera for about $2,000, the PTR 10 Mark II sells for $2,300. So we're at $4,350 53, that's $6,000 plus the motor's 300. So for under $6,500, you can have a full pan tilt zoom camera. And I realize that some people are going to go, $6,500 is a lot of money. And I'm not going to disagree with you. $6,500 is a lot of money. But when you factor that most 1-inch sensor cameras that do pan tilt zoom are going to cost you well over $10,000 on a 1-inch sensor solution, this becomes not only a better image quality solution, a more flexible solution that gets you that shallow adaptive field. So if you wanted a more cinematic presentation, you can do it with a box camera. You're also a more affordable solution than using a pan tilt zoom solution. So we sort of looked at this like, well, this just makes perfect sense. And so both companies put this all together, and they'll start showing it at InfoComm at the end of this week.
Nice, yeah, and we were really lucky at Cinegear. Was it 2 weeks ago at this point that they were able to bring one of the units over to the show, and we had it set up on display, and we've got some footage from the show, from our the attempted live stream that we did from the show that we'll have showing during this part here, and I don't know, it was so cool watching people come over and actually play with it, because we had that controller that had the bank for the 4 camera inputs, and being able to just hook this thing up. I think it took maybe like 15 minutes to actually hook the whole thing up after we figured how we were going to run cables sitting on top of a glass case instead of having the thing mounted somewhere.
Yeah, it was very last minute that they were able to get a prototype that they felt comfortable enough displaying. So they brought us a prototype that they felt would not give people a bad experience when using it. You and I got a chance to play around with it, but what I think was most interesting is this was the Cinegear show, which is not historically a live production show. And we had so much interest from people who were looking for remote production applications, because even when COVID goes away and we're no longer in a pandemic situation, the world has now officially fundamentally changed.
Oh, yes.
It's going to be very difficult for you to convince anybody to fly across the country to conduct a live interview versus them doing it from a Zoom. Everybody now knows how to do what you and I are doing right now with each other, which is a teleconference, visual teleconference. So it's now a question of how do you get the look that you're trying to achieve without being on set to be able to do it, or not being in person to be able to do it. And so this world is never going to go away. And so there's going to be a need for professional athletes, celebrities, high level, CEOs of corporations, all the way down to just influencers who have a separate production team, especially for like podcast applications. Like if you can imagine what Joe Rogan is doing with with his podcast, and how the market has fundamentally changed for live streaming with podcast, the ability to be able to remotely produce that content with the best production talent in another state, while you're in the state of preference that you'd like to live in. We're not going away from that. That world is going to be here forever. And if you think that houses of worship are going to stop live streaming, their set, there's what they're working with, every single Sunday forever from now on, there will be live streamed events to be able to help the people who can't come to those sessions. And so this world is not going away, and that's why there was so much interest at Cinegear for it, which kind of caught us by surprise.
Yeah, and what I honestly thought was super cool about it too is when we were at the event in Dallas, which was another one of the kind of church facility style shows. There was even like the side benefit that a lot of the camera operators, the filmmakers, the videographers, because there's a large number of very technical or very heavily invested videographers, and I would consider them filmmakers in every aspect of videography that you could possibly think of. Doesn't matter what category you're doing it in. But I saw a ton of people who, were excited about the PTZ style option that this camera now affords, but then they were equally excited about the fact that, they don't have to invest all of that money, $10,000 if we're up on the high end. They don't have to invest that $10,000 to have a camera that sits static for
Yeah.
days upon days of the week, not being used. The solution that DataVideo and Panasonic Lumix have come up with now offers them something that's a much better investment to make. Being able to take that camera off, throw it on a Ronin gimbal, and then, create social media content, create, short films, and especially in the kind of religious side of the industry, where you're starting to have to reach out to more and more people, and you're trying to find new creative ways to reach more and more people. Being able to use this to do that and not have to invest in multiple different camera systems or multiple different options from a camera brand, I was really encouraged just to see the enthusiasm from this crowd in what everyone says is, like such a hard industry, the video and filmmaking industry these days. People aren't buying that many cameras. It's like, no, they're buying them. They're just being a lot smarter with the money that they're spending when they're buying these cameras. I don't know if you had some of the same conversations.
Yeah, I think so. When we, it's a, full transparency, Sean and I were working in Dallas at, it was called the Church Facilities Expo. It's a show for people who manage church facilities, and a percentage of those people are responsible for the, video production that's there. And so, you know, it's no secret that, most churches have a service maybe once a week, or, at the most about 3 times a week, right?
Yeah.
Which means anywhere from 4 to 6 days a week, their PTZ cameras are sitting there doing nothing. But it's not like churches are doing nothing the rest of that time. you know, in between, outings with children who attend, as parents attend the facility, um, to fundraisers, to, philanthropy that you want to be able to document. All of those things have value, and they add richness to a ceremony. It's
Yeah.
great when you're able to tie in the philanthropic work that you're doing with the discussion about how, it warmed your heart to help these people, and then to be able to integrate B-roll that's shown behind, the minister or whoever's giving the sermon, and have that go out over the live broadcast. All of that adds texture and beauty to what you're trying to accomplish. So, being able to pull that camera off the PT and be able to take it out in the field and not have to make a secondary camera investment in order to do that. It's just it's certainly a cost-effective way of, serving 2 purposes,
Yeah.
which is, PTZ cameras are terrific products. And they do a great job in their single design philosophy, right? Which is as a pan-tilt zoom camera. This is more of a multi-tool device that can fill multiple purposes. And so that's where I think a lot of people had interest. But it's not just church facilities. There are people who are doing live production, right? If
Oh,
you
yeah.
run a small to medium-sized venue where you're attracting anywhere from 20 to a couple hundred people every couple of days to watch concerts or stand-up comedy routines, again, there's multiple times of the week that's not going on, but there's other activities that are happening in your facility that you'd like to be able to document. If for no other reason than to sell your venue for other things outside of the live event you typically do.
Oh, yeah.
If you're hosting a wedding in your live event, why not pull that camera off the PT head and do a little documentation of that wedding that's happening at your facility? And so it's those sort of multitask applications outside of the image quality that really got people's attention when we started talking about the product.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I once you showed me the concept, and I actually got to see it in person. I don't think anyone is surprised by the fact that, like, I am not as hardcore video as you are, Matt, with pretty much anything in our brand. I mean, I'm starting to catch up. I'm constantly trying to learn and get more under my belt, but there was just something so cool about seeing this thing all set up, being able to actually play around and control it, and most importantly, being able to throw that 50 to 200 on there and actually zoom the lens, which was, I don't know, it's so simple for the people that are using these things daily. They're like, okay, it's zooming a lens. What's the big deal? But knowing that you have all that flexibility and just that it really can open the doors for a ton of different, filmmakers, videographers, venues, companies, whoever's going to be investing in this. I think that's what's really so cool about what the box camera means for the Lumix cameras moving forward. We've got, so I have my BS1H here that we've been using for most of the demonstrations for it. So micro four thirds, 10.2 megapixel, really, really good in low light. And you can get that extra long reach with something like the 50 to 200, because you're effectively at 400 millimeter. But knowing that I can just pop this thing off, throw it on my Ronin, have, active track work with it so that I can actually be filming and running around with it with more automation, more integration in with all these other companies is just so cool. Now, I'm curious how you think cameras like the BS1H will fit into the PTZ camera, because at that point we're talking how much larger in a sensor? Like, I mean,
Yeah, it's
like,
4 times. It's 4 times bigger than a BGH1, right?
yeah,
Which means it's like 32 times bigger than like a quarter
yeah,
inch sensor camera.
yeah,
It's
it's
substantially
gigantic.
larger. So yeah, I think there's always going to be trade-offs, right? When we go to these bigger sensors, the benefit is just obviously massively superior low light sensitivity, right? So I can really crank the ISO and I don't have to worry about supplemental lighting solutions. And frankly, when we're dealing with a live event space, whether that's a church or a concert, you're really stuck with what the artisans who are crafting the lighting are going to do, because it's much more about the people who are in person than it is the people who are remote. So
Yeah.
having the extra dynamic range seems to be the even bigger draw to cameras like the BS1H and the BGH1, even more so than the greater low light sensitivity. It's that extra dynamic range because they're dealing with a lot of clipped highlights all the time and it just drives them nuts. And so that extra DR is really what I think draws a lot of people into these two cameras. But it's also about a look. Um, you know, I would have a tough time with the BS1H in certain applications for live event because the depth of field just gets too shallow. And like there's a trend right now. I watch professional sports, so sue me. And there's a lot of deployment now of full frame camera on gimbals to capture like the touchdown celebration or to capture like when a player makes like a really awesome dunk in a basketball game, or they're going back, or the timeout's been called, and so you got a guy on a gimbal following him around with a full frame sensor. And I am not a fan of that look right now because I think the depth of field is just entirely too shallow. Um, Even with the best autofocus systems out there, there's just no way you can keep it in focus. And they're not dedicating an AC, like a second camera, first AC, to actually pull focus for these guys. So it's just a real challenge for them to be able to keep that stuff in focus. But I tell you what, for a religious service, when I want to absolutely isolate, the person who's giving the mass or the sermon, obliterating that background and just shallowing that depth of field gives a very cinematic look, and it's very striking, right? Being able to isolate on the lead singer during a particularly emotional piece of music and get that just shallow depth of field. Um, they're calling it the cinema look, and more of these facilities are looking for a cinema look to what they're doing, but they only want certain shots to exhibit that cinema look, which is either a Super 35 sensor or full frame sensor. And so kind of a mix and match between BGH and S1H creates a really nice sort of juxtaposition for that. So you can have your wide shots on BGH and get a wider angle of view. And the camera's low light sensitivity is still excellent, and it has very good dynamic range. And then for those isolated shots, you can absolutely go full frame and be real happy. Or you can crop to Super 35 on BS1H for some of your wide shot cameras, stop the lens down to get yourself a little bit more depth of field. So there's just a lot of flexibility here and being able to mix and match these looks. And remember, you're only paying an extra 1,500 bucks to get that full frame experience on the box camera over the price point of the BGH1. So it makes for a nice, relatively affordable way of adding that full frame look and all of the power of the box camera.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've always pointed out for the last, couple of years since the release of the S series cameras that the Micro Four Thirds world has its place in the industry. It's a pillar that grew the Lumix brand. It's a pillar that's going to stay around for an incredibly long time. None of us knows obviously what the future holds, but areas like this and seeing cameras like the BGH1 come out that really, to your point, for people that are, or for situations where, the shallow depth of field, yeah, it looks cool in YouTube videos and it looks cool in cinematic production, but there are a lot of things that, we shouldn't force this ultra shallow depth of field look onto because it just looks distracting and overdone and overblown. The Micro Four Thirds platform is spectacular for things like that because you can still do shallow depth of field work. You can still get fast lenses. You can get faster lenses that are smaller and lighter relative to the sensor size so that you can still do that kind of selective focus work. But then you get the ability to go ultra long telephoto with it and work with compression for stuff like this. And then not actually have a distracting style of the content you're creating or the video work that you're doing. So I'm really excited to see what these cameras do for the video side of our industry. Yes, mirrorless cameras, the S1H, the GH5s, the upcoming GH6 when that camera comes out, they're not gonna, ever go away. I think the market and the industry has 100% gotten comfortable with those are the cameras that the average person, and I say average outside of like ultra high-end productions where you're building cameras out, the average person is always going to be comfortable using those cameras. But you start watching platform concerts. We down here in Austin, we just got done with ACL, and the number of cameras that I saw that were set up as coverage cameras to show the stage, but then put them up on giant. They're not jumbotrons anymore. That's
LED
like
boards.
what, like the giant LED boards, so the people in the back of the stage can see them. A lot of that stuff was being done with PTZ style cameras down here. And a lot of the smaller venues, a lot of concert venues that have been struggling over the last, almost 2 years at this point, are starting to integrate solutions like this. And if they're able to do it on a way more cost-effective budget, to your point, Matt, that they can shoot one event, have the camera set up, be able to broadcast it out, be able to set it up into their venue so that more people can see the show, but then be able to take those cameras down and film promotional pieces between shows, be able to, take a camera backstage and actually talk with bands or, other artists that are going to be presenting. There are so many possibilities that come out of something as simple as a little box. And the fact that it's got the Lumix and the Panasonic backing behind it, it's a reliable product. It's tough, it's durable, it carries everything that we've always talked about with the Panasonic brand. I mean, there's a reason why we've been around for over 100 years. Yes, a box design is not new, but the fact that we're behind it and that it's got that reliability of the brand, I don't know, it's just really exciting. And I know I'm super excited about it, obviously. I can barely ever shut up about the things. So
Well, and I think one thing that this will help to further showcase is not just Panasonic's electronic capabilities. You know, we're in a relatively new camera system. Even with Micro Four Thirds, we're in a relatively new camera system, and we were involved in video a lot sooner in the game than a lot of the other companies were in these interchangeable lens designs. So we've already learned a thing or two about what people expect out of their lenses. And I think it catches people by surprise the first time they connect a BGH1 to the LUMIX Tether app and they see an option to be able to set things at tenths of a stop increments instead of thirds of a stop. And they go, well, why do I need that? And then all of a sudden you look at how many f-stops you can actually control in the Lumix Tether for Multicam app, and you're like, oh my word, look at the granularity. And I can make these very minor changes in the iris, and it's not these very hard changes as we're making it, right? It's very smooth transitions. Now, not every Lumix lens can do this, but the lenses like our 8 to 18, the 20, the 12 to 60, either
Yeah.
variant, the latest, the 50 to 200, and then our latest variants, the 10 to 25, the 25 to 50, they all have this really buttery smooth iris control with these very granular adjustments, which become very important to this category of customer.
Oh yeah.
The other consideration is what happens to the focus point when I zoom my lens, right? And,
Oh yeah.
you know, contrary to popular belief, for these live productions, nobody wants to be on autofocus still, because
No.
um, even the finest autofocus systems are just too inconsistent at pulling focus. And there's a way that a lot of people are used to running their cameras, which is that you put it into place, your camera operator zooms all the way close to the object on stage, they set focus once, and then when they come wide, the camera's gearing system, its cam system that's inside the lens, will make micro adjustments to the lens elements to keep that object in focus as we go wide. And again, not every Lumix lens can do what I'm about to describe, but lenses like our 50 to 200, lenses like the two new Leica lenses that we have for Micro Four Thirds, the 10 to 25, the 25 to 50, and frankly, every zoom lens in full frame, every one of our zoom
Yep.
lenses in full frame offers you this electrical version of parfocal, which is what we just described, where because we're going to turn the camera into manual focus, you zoom in tight, you set your focus. As you come wide, our engineers have programmed an algorithm that knows how to adjust the focus motor and focus element to give you a parfocal behavior out of that lens. And now you're getting that at a much less expensive lens than
Oh
what it would
yeah.
cost you to buy a full frame parfocal, Fujinon, Cabrio series lens, which is a gorgeous lens. And if you got a spare 10 grand to spend on one, I would highly recommend you pick one up. You're going to love it, but you can get that behavior out of a 70 to 300 for about what is it, $1,200 for a
Something
70
like
to
that. Yeah.
300?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's going to give you the same basic behavior with very little lens breathing. And you've got this level of control that I think people will come to appreciate more how much engineering we've put in. I've had clients that are currently testing lenses like the Tokina. They make like an 18 to 300 or 16 to 300 and a 16 to 200 as well.
Yeah.
No, 400 actually. 16 to 400 I think is what they make. And those lenses are compact, they do a lot, but parfocal they are not. And so it requires a different way of looking at how you're going to operate the product when you don't have that parfocal behavior. So I think people will really come to appreciate the level of engineering and how much thought has been put into our lenses. We were looking way down the road beyond where you guys might have been looking as to what our lenses would need to be useful.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's these features that were included and are one of the reasons why you pay what you pay for the Panasonic glass.
Yeah, and that's actually a really really good point, because just as you said, we've been doing a lot of this stuff for years now, and
Mhm.
especially with the S series cameras, lenses like our 70 to 200, which from day one designed to be built where it had that electronically assisted parfocal nature. It's incredibly well focus breathing controlled. And yeah, when it launched, it was one of the more expensive 70 to 200 2.8s out on the market for full frame mirrorless cameras. And you saw a lot of the industry start to make different approaches to these types of lenses. But recently, you see that, people are starting to see what it is that our engineers, our optics teams, our software engineers have been able to do because we've been doing it for so long. And now you start seeing a lot of people, as usual, copying it again, starting to incorporate some of the technologies or try to incorporate some of the technologies that we've been doing for years, and we've been able to refine it. Uh, and when they do it, the lenses get a lot more expensive. And you start looking at it saying, well, okay, yeah, there is a reason why a lot of our S Pro lenses, there's a reason why they are more expensive. It's not because it's, we just want to make an expensive lens. It's because the amount of time and care that gets put into those optics, it actually shows in the real world, and you start seeing other companies mimic it, and or at least try to mimic it. And I don't know about you, Matt, but from the day that we launched the S series cameras till now, I've been just super excited with damn near every optic that we've come out with. And a lot of them I don't necessarily shoot with. Like, I don't really shoot with a 20 to 60 millimeter. I'm a fixed focal length shooter. I like my prime lenses. I like my fast prime lenses. I am desperately waiting for that 35 millimeter 1.8. I'm with everybody in the chat that is going to go nuts because they want the 35 to finally come out. Believe me, I'm with you. I want it to come out too. But like our 24 to 70, it's phenomenal. It's super sharp. It's got all those characteristics for both photographers and videographers. So when you jump back and forth between these two mediums, which is happening more and more every single day, you're not having to go get a whole nother set of optics. I mean, it's just super exciting. And I know you've started to branch a little bit more into some photography too, which is awesome. I'm super stoked about that. Yeah, it's just really fun.
Well, and I think if we go back to the pan-tilt zoom solution, right? To be able to take a BS1H, which is a $3,500 camera body that has JED lock, it has time code, it has an SDI port, so it's ready for just about any application you could ever need it for, especially for live event. You have that Ethernet port, so you have the ability to control the camera over Ethernet or live stream via Ethernet, right? So you can actually pull a 4K image out over Ethernet and bring that into your switching system. And then you partner that with a 20 to 60 for front of house. And yes, it's a 3.5 to 5.6 lens, but remember, in pan-tilt zoom, they're all variable iris lenses. That's nothing new. That is the way that it is. And that thing is like this big when you put it all together, right? There's no size to the camera at that point. And then for back of house, we can add the 70 to 300. And again, yes, it's variable iris, but that's going to get you up to 300 millimeters. Or when you do the APS-C crop of the camera, you're going to get another 50% longer focal length. So you go from a 300 to a 450 on that camera, and you start to price out that whole package. You begin to realize just how affordable it can be to create a pan-tilt zoom application. Again, you add the PTR-10.2 as your pan-tilt head. You add a tilt-to-nucleus motor. You get the crossover cable from DataVideo, and you're ready to go. And you have parfocal behavior out of the lens. You have very, very, very low occurrences of focus breathing. You just have a system that makes it super convenient to be able to get just gorgeous cinematic looks for your live events. And there are people now who are putting Sony Venice product or Panasonic Vericam products as live event cameras right now, and they're putting them on Vinton PT heads, and the Vinton PT head alone is like $8,000. I can get an entire system around a BS1H and 2 lenses for the price of a Vinton PT head, and I'm going to get a look that frankly matches exactly what you're getting out of those other cameras for a fraction of the money. So it just makes good financial sense. If you want a cinema look and you have a live event, why wouldn't you be looking at these cameras? To me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, yeah, and what would Panasonic be if not, really kind of touting the pragmatist of a lot of of a lot of the industry. We make incredibly pragmatic products that are reasonably priced and just do the job that you expect them to do. It's definitely like I said, it's an exciting time. This is probably some of the most fun I've had working for Panasonic. Even before I worked for the company, this is downright the most exciting time I think I've had in a long time. So, well, thank you, Matt. I thank you so much for taking the time. As everyone knows, we are getting busier again now. A lot of us are going to be out at different trade shows. I'm currently, as this video is playing right now, I am in Nashville, Tennessee right now. I think you're at some convention in either Denver or I don't know, wherever. There's a whole lot of stuff going on over the next couple of weeks, but we will be back live next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So make sure to uh, get subscribed. Make sure to turn the notifications on. The link for next week's video will be up shortly. And yeah, once again, thank you so much, Matt, for joining us. This was an awesome conversation.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everybody out there for watching.